I know this is a farm channel. We're raising heritage hogs on pasture the old-fashioned way in the free state of New Hampshire. And we're going to be talking about how this lack of purpose in the millennial generation ties in very directly with the need to make America farmers again. Your life is too easy. And when I say easy, I don't mean that you need to suffer more. I mean easy in terms of the goal that has been fed to us as what we should be aiming for as millennials throughout our entire life is that we should aim for convenience, prosperity, ease as a target that we are trying to hit. And the problem is that aiming for those without having to put in the requisite amount of sacrifice leaves a big empty hole where your body and your heart are supposed to come together, and that ultimately translates to a lack of purpose. Now, I'm not saying this from a standpoint of being judgmental and that I have all the answers. I want to actually share a little bit about my life story and what brought me here to raising hogs on pasture. Most of you don't know, but I used to have a YouTube channel, and I'll link that below so you guys can kind of see a little bit of my history. But my old YouTube channel was about how I used to use rock climbing as a vehicle. I climbed on a handful of different continents and did some pretty gnarly stuff, but used that as a vehicle to have a discussion about inspiration in living with chronic illness, because I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes when I was 16 years old. And one of the things that I found, both through my initial encounter with diabetes as a 16-year-old living in Fairbanks, Alaska, and I was in that hospital there in Alaska when I discovered that my life was going to be altered. And I wound up having seizures and going unconscious, and I lost about a week of time that I don't remember. But when I came to in the ICU and they told me, hey, guess what? You have type 1 diabetes and you're going to be taking insulin injections in your belly for the rest of your life. And oh, by the way, you're not going to be able to go anywhere or do anything without kind of keeping a medical leash on yourself, because your life is always going to be compromised and at risk because of this really dangerous and problematic medical condition. And from a medical standpoint, I don't fault the nurses for taking a very direct and kind of putting the fear of God in me at a very young age, because they wanted to make sure that I would take it seriously. But when I had this encounter with my own mortality, almost dying, it made me realize that, oh, like, dying is not something that just happens to old people. Dying is something that is going to happen to everybody. And I am no more guaranteed to make it through the next 24 hours than any other person is. And when you realize how fragile your life is, that enables you to get closer to a sense of purpose, because you're able to distill what matters and differentiate what matters from what is just fluff. And so managing my blood sugar, managing my health became my full-time job from the time I was a sophomore in high school. And everything else that I built around my life was ultimately built around my first priority is to take care of my health, because my body needs to be in shape, because if I can't function and I can't help myself, then I'm not going to be able to be of use to anybody else or help anybody else. And my quality of life can go down the drain very quickly. Even with a couple of bad decisions, I can wind up in a situation where my quality of life is complete garbage and completely compromised. And in high school, learning about this medical condition and learning how to take it on and carry that monkey on my back made me realize, well, if having challenge in my life is going to be part of my life, maybe there's a way that I could actually kind of apply this principle beyond my medical condition and go into climbing mountains, which ironically, mountain climbing came into my life because I was going to high school in Alaska. We did a PE unit on rock climbing, and it was right after I got out of the hospital in the spring, and I had just come back to class, and everybody was like happy to see me, and oh, hey, good job, man, you didn't die, we're happy you're still with us. And in trying to do some rock climbing and get back moving physically, I was horrified and scared of, falling, as any normal person would be going up into the vertical world. And that fear drew my focus away from everything else I was dealing with, my blood sugar and my, diabetes and all that other stuff. And I realized that a bigger challenge is what's necessary to kind of take the weight off of the worries that I was carrying around with me, and that, ironically, seeking out bigger challenges are going to be what's going to provide me with a greater sense of purpose. And I made a habit of looking for ways to become comfortable and to tolerate inconvenience and discomfort. And I continued to pursue rock climbing. And as a young adult, when I was kind of out of college and in my early and mid 20s, I was pursuing sponsorship with some of the insulin companies because I wanted to be a spokesperson and be able to talk to other people who were living with diabetes, specifically families that had kids, so that they could understand that when you're diagnosed with this at a young age, that it's not a hopeless scenario. It's actually an oddly shaped piece of the puzzle that you can use to build your life and give you a greater sense of direction and purpose that can make you into a much better person. You know, the way that they purify gold is by putting it in the fire and burning out the impurities. It's not just digging it out of the ground with a shovel and then just plopping it on a little cushion and then selling it to somebody for tens of thousands of dollars. It's worth much less when it has not been purified. And it's the same way with our lives, that if we are going around through our daily life seeking the easiest way to do things, like the easiest paths always lead downhill and to a lower place. And if we want to have something that's worth having and worth doing, and if we want to be somebody who's worth being, we have to understand that ease and comfort are not the things that we should be pursuing, but rather a greater tolerance for carrying a heavy burden and for suffering. That is the path to be on that is ultimately going to enable us to be more comfortable. Right? It's kind of backwards, because pursuing comfort makes you weaker and softer, and you can't find comfort anywhere as a result. But when you're pursuing discomfort, you're able to carry a heavier burden. And so the things that at one point would have crushed you now become manageable, where you can hold on to that and you can carry the weight and lead other people. You know, this is not too far from the message that Jordan Peterson had before he went into criticizing anybody who thought that we shouldn't be paying for, Israel to bomb Gaza to smithereens, and before he kind of went down that political rabbit hole. But this is a widely available and an obvious truth, but it's kind of an inconvenient one. And so I went the way of climbing until my first marriage kind of hit the rocks, and then there again. And it was right around the time that I was getting divorced that my ex-wife said, "Oh, by the way, I'm pregnant." And so now I'm getting divorced and we have a baby on the way. And of course, this meant that, we were living in Utah at the time, because it was a good place to be as a climber, and I had a good, I was working as a guide when I wasn't climbing, and I was running a nonprofit and making videos and working on sponsorships, and climbing was available pretty much year round, because the Southwest, the weather is, you can always drive somewhere where the weather's good enough to be able to hit a good climbing spot. And basically, when it came to the point that she was ready to go, she said, "I'm moving back to my mom's and I'm going to be in Massachusetts." So now I'm left with this burden that I have to carry, this emotional burden of having a choice between either being a deadbeat, which I could not live with being out of my daughter's life and not being there for her and spending time with her and being able to guide her as she's growing up. I'd never had any children before, so I didn't know exactly what this was going to entail. But I certainly knew that I couldn't be a deadbeat. But working as a climbing guide and as a climber and influencer, filmmaker, trying to kind of get a foot on the ladder financially, I knew that I couldn't do that from Massachusetts. And the money that I was making doing that stuff living in Utah was not sufficient to allow me to travel back and forth and to actually play a meaningful role in her life. So I had to say, okay, we're gonna shift plans, and now what? Which brought me right up about to the time when my daughter was being born, and being in the hospital, I'm full of existential angst. And what am I going to do with my life now? Everything that I've gained to get to this point, where is it going to take me? And there's nothing I can do, because I can either be a deadbeat and hate myself and not have a role in my daughter's life, which is something that is going to eat me away from the inside, and I'm not going to be able to live with myself, but I might be able to have a decent professional career and continue pursuing what I've done to inspire other people. But I'm always going to know that I'm a fake and a fraud, because there's a little girl out there who's not going to have a relationship with me because I'm out, globe trotting and climbing mountains to try to be able to put money in the bank. Or I can give all of that up, and now I don't have a job, and I don't really have a clear path to getting a different job that I can take with me in the East Coast, where the Boston area isn't really known as a rock climbing and adventure capital of the world. So I'm going to have to literally reinvent myself. And I'm sitting here like mulling all of this stuff over. I'm getting divorced. I have a kid. I have guilt. I have started to make it in one area where I'm starting to see some financial success, but not enough to really make it. And now I have to give all of that up and start from square one and figure out how to be a dad at the same time. And the moment that my daughter was born, this burden that I was seeing it as a burden, as soon as I held her in my hands for the very first time, and I kid you not, and I've had some people tell me, I don't believe it, but I swear, as I'm standing here, as I live and breathe, I held her in my hands, and for the first time in my life, literally nothing else mattered, because this big challenge gave me a sense of purpose, to where it was like, okay, this is going to be the next chapter of my life, but for however many years this is going to go on till she's able to take care of herself. Everything that I want to do now has a clear direction, where sense of purpose and actual purpose comes down to spending time with this little one, giving her my love, giving her my attention, teaching her everything that I know, helping her learn, taking her places, helping her to be a better person than I am, and being a part of building something with her that is going to outlive me. And that sense of purpose, it was so profound and mind-blowing. It was better than the biggest mountain that I've ever climbed. It was better than the biggest check that I ever cashed from the pharmaceutical companies. It was better than anything I had experienced up until that point, because it was just clear. And it just eliminated so much of the other things that I thought were important, and that I was spending all this energy and time worrying about. But the reality was, those things were small potatoes. I needed a bigger challenge so that I could have an easier life. And that brings me here to farming. And I know we're 15 minutes deep, and I appreciate you guys staying with me. And if you can relate to any of this, by all means, please comment below, because I would like to hear from you guys. I know this is a little bit more personal than the normal meat and potatoes of how to price your pork chops, but when it came to farming, my life transitioned from climbing to being a parent, and part of being a parent became, how do I make a buck and still find something to do that's going to be worth the effort, that I have a way to put in my time and energy into something that really is meaningful. Because climbing was a great vehicle to teach me all about, facing mortality and dealing with fear and controlling and managing emotions. Very valuable in that regard, but nobody needs a climber. I climbed, you may be familiar with Angel's Landing in Zion National Park. There's a steep trail up there, but I climbed up the cliff face. And I remember after climbing up the cliff face, meeting people who were hiking down, and they were like, oh, this is the hardest, most scariest thing I've ever done in my life. And like, we popped up over the edge of the cliff, my partner and I dragging a couple of big bags full of ropes and all of our anchors and all that other stuff, and just kind of chuckling, because hearing people talk about how hard it was to walk up the path when we had literally come up the face. And, it was a great vehicle for learning about all of that stuff, but you can just walk the path up to the top of the mountain. Now you can take a drone up there. You don't need to have somebody go up a rock face. There's no practical utility to it. And that's where farming came in, because a big part of managing my health has been in eating a diet that is heavy on animal products, specifically animal fat, lard, for example, and meat. And I realized during COVID, the next step for me is doing something that's going to matter, and is going to do something that is going to enable me to manage my health and make better quality protein available to more people. And farming was the obvious answer, because how else are you going to get as much meat of the best quality as you're willing to put into it and make it, where it's readily available and you get to control how you raise it, how you process it, how you finish it, who you sell it to, or if you sell it at all. And you don't have to worry about going into a grocery store and somebody telling you, oh no, you can only get a couple of packages of these because this is being limited. It's being rationed out because the government shut down the processing plant out in central Iowa or in Ohio, and therefore we're on a restriction for this time period. I said, nah, hell with that. I'm going to grow my own and I'm going to get into farming. And so the more that I've done with farming, I'm seeing the exact same process unfold with farming that unfolded for me in learning about my diabetes when I was in high school and learning how to confront my own mortality when I had to take an insulin injection and realize, oops, if you take a little too much, you could die. And then having to learn that same basic negotiation when you're climbing. And it's like, double check your knots, because if you get your knot wrong, you could die or your partner could die, right? There's a lot of real consequences. And it's living with that constant sense of, if I do this wrong, bad things can happen. So it really matters if I do this right or not. It's not something like, I could do this, I could not do this. Somebody else is going to come behind and do it. But it's understanding that there are real consequences. And instead of trying to insulate oneself from those sets of consequences by pursuing ease and comfort, where, hey, even if we hit a bump in the road, it doesn't really matter. No big deal. We're protected. We're cool. No, going out and confronting those challenges in the real world, where now I have animals that depend on me. Talk about a sense of purpose. I have little baby piglets that were just born, and they are depending on me for feed, and their mama is depending on me for feed and for shelter and for medical care. And I have customers who are buying pork, who are depending on me to produce it ethically and in a high quality manner. And so this constant process of doing hard things until they become not that hard, and then either through circumstances dictating it or other priorities dictating it, having to find another area in which to express this process of selectively taking on challenge and doing hard things because it matters. It has given my life so much purpose, but it's all small, silly little things. It's not like getting struck by lightning and God beams down from heaven and says, oh, this is who you're supposed to be. And maybe that'll happen someday. And I'm hoping for that. That would be wonderful, because I'm sure there's additional layers of the onion, additional levels to take this interaction, this conversation beyond farming. But I can tell you that, yeah, it's very true that you can just go to the grocery store and buy a dozen eggs. Why should you buy your own chickens, right? You can go to the store and buy a package of bacon. Everybody likes bacon. You can buy pork chops. You don't need to be raising your own here, right? It's not something that has to be done, but it's the idea of saying, I'm going to voluntarily confront difficulty because it matters. Because it matters, and I'm going to put that sacrificial time, I'm going to get out of my own head by putting my effort into something and someone that is separate and outside of myself, and getting out of my own headspace where all the worry and the glumness and the lack of purpose and the emptiness, where all that all lives in your head. That lives in my head just as much as it lives in anybody else's head. But the more I am physically employed in serving the betterment of others, whether that's my animals, whether that's people in my community, my customers, people online, you guys, I would love it if you subscribe to this channel so we can have this conversation and take this journey together, because that's ultimately what this is. I started climbing not thinking that it was going to take me into farming. And now I'm farming. I don't know where this is going to take me, but I've been doing it for 4 years, and I will do it as long as I am physically, financially, and I have the capability, while being a good and attentive spouse and father, to be able to devote this time to my animals, because it's a challenge that I've chosen, and that's what matters, because that's what gives us a sense of purpose. So I hope you guys got something out of this. Again, love to have you subscribe. Tell me where you're at with any of this process, if any of this resonates with you or not. I'm Stephen Reichert. This is Rowan Ridge Farm. I will be making more videos just like this. We'll keep the conversation going, and we'll see you guys soon.